Edward Brown, host of The Best of Investing, here to remind you to tune in this week on Saturday at 8 p.m. Our guest is going to be Simon Chen from Pacific Private Money's Arrival Fund. You're not going to want to miss this show. That's The Best of Investing on Saturday at 8 p.m. Welcome. You're listening to The Best of Investing. I'm your host, Edward Brown. Our phone number is 888-912-1190. Use that number to answer the trivia questions for a 5-pack tanning certificate given away during this show. And that certificate's not sponsored by the radio station, but by Tan Bella Tanning Salon with 2 locations in San Francisco and 1 in Marin. Today's trivia theme, miscellaneous trivia. And ordinarily, I start talking a little bit about the Pacific Private Money Arrival Fund, but there's a reason I'm not doing it right now, and that is because we have the head honcho, Simon Chen from Arrival Funds. I'm going to read a little bio. Simon is president of and CEO of Arrival Home Loans. Prior to joining them, Simon held positions of CEO of ERA Real Estate and EVP of Product and Innovation at Anywhere Real Estate, which globally represents over 340,000 residential and commercial real estate agents. At Anywhere, which is the company he was with, Simon drove key initiatives focused on strategy, culture, franchise development, and ancillary revenue streams such as mortgage and title. You know what? I'm going to stop right there and welcome Simon to The Best of Investing.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's an honor to be on the show. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right. So first of all, let's start off with the current state of the United States real estate market.
Sure. So I get this question a lot. It's dining room chatter a lot, right? Anybody that knows what industry I'm in, anytime they come over to the house or whatever, they always ask sort of, what the market looks like. Is this a good time to buy or sell, right? That's always the first question. I think it's no big surprise that since sort of the end of 22, as the interest rates were skyrocketing upward, right, that the market has cooled substantially, right? And understandably so. A lot of folks that had low interest rates on their current homes or what have you, down in the 3% range kind of thing, right, are justifiably sort of hesitant to go out and buy a new house when the interest rates are, in the 7s or 8s or what have you, right? If you do the math, obviously you get a lot less house, right? If you're paying that much more sort of in interest or what have you. And that's driven down the number of transactions that are happening, sort of in any given year within the real estate world, which means, everybody that's tied to real estate, like mortgage companies or real estate brokerages, obviously, is doing substantially fewer units, right, than they did in a quote unquote typical year.
Okay.
If you want a sense for what typical is, which is, what a lot of my sort of house guys always ask me, I'm like, on average in the US, existing home sales tend to be in the neighborhood of about 5 million units a year, right? Just to give you just in big round numbers.
Both for new construction and existing, just total 5 million units?
In the ballpark, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in the ballpark, just, sort of new home sale or home sales in the US residential. And in big years, right, booming years, like after, we all figured out that we were going to die immediately from COVID, for example, right, there was a huge boom where people were like, gosh, if I can be, a remote employee these days, then I'm going to maybe relocate somewhere else. There was a huge sort of move in that direction. In those years, we did, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 6.5 million transactions in those years, right? So that gives you a sense of the scale in terms of, how much the market can swing in terms of numbers of units of homes sold in a year when people are feeling the need to, sort of buy or move or something like that, right? We are now, over the last couple of years since 2022, down and around like the 4 million, transactions a year, right? So a good 20% less than normal, right? And I guess, the way to think of it is people will still need to move, right? Like most of those transactions are from people that, didn't necessarily, weren't buying like vacation homes. They were buying, homes that they're going to, live in or what have you. And so the way to view it is, I believe, is like there's pent up demand, right, that's been building over the last couple of years. That's going to need to be released, as the market starts to improve or interest rates start to come down. And we're starting to see that as well.
All right, we're going to cut to our first commercial break here. First trivia question, and just as a reminder to Simon, if you know the answer, don't say anything quite yet. All right, here's the first trivia question. Which famous musician's tooth sold for over $30,000 at an auction? Call 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins that tanning certificate, which, by the way, is worth over $100. Given away by Tan Bella Tanning Salon with 2 locations in San Francisco and 1 in Marin. Again, the trivia question is, which famous musician's tooth sold for over $30,000 at an auction? All right, stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to The Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, along with Simon Chen from Arrival Homes. First trivia question, which famous musician's tooth sold for over $30,000 at an auction? What do you think?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say Elvis, right? Just because.
Someone else had guessed on a different show. No, actually, John Lennon.
Oh, okay. All right. I was going to guess either Elvis or the Beatles, so I wasn't too far off, but I picked the wrong one. Yeah.
Exactly what I was thinking. So go ahead, finish off. You were talking about how inventory changed with housing.
Yeah. So basically, just not as many homes are selling these days. Not as many people are interested in selling because they don't quite know where they're going to move next. Basically, right. So what you're finding is a situation where there's very, very low inventories. Not a lot of homes available on the market or what have you. But things will obviously start to pick up as the interest rates come down. So the beginning of this year has already seen a substantial uptick from last year, right? So we anticipate that this is going to be a relatively, given the last few years, strong summer in terms of activity, right? Because fundamentally, people do need to move oftentimes, right? They've just been sort of waiting until the market is favorable to them or what have you.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Arrival Homes. Tell us about you or your company.
Sure. So, one of the realities that I just came to realize the other day is that in the 30 some odd years that I've been buying homes personally for, my own occupancy or what have you, I have had to bid competitively for every single one of those homes.
Really?
Right. So in 30 years of all different, obviously, market conditions and all different interest rates and everything like that, I've always been in a multiple bid situation. Right.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it's kind of like what your parents tell you when you're growing up, right? Like real estate's location, 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 right?
Wait.
So regardless of
location, and what was the last one?
Location, right?
Okay,
Right. So, and that's the reality of it, right? Like the desirable places are always going to have competition,
Yeah.
right? And you're always going to be in sort of a bidding war sort of situation. And so Arrival basically is built on sort of the premise of we help you buy your new house before you sell your old house without you needing to get into a bind that a lot of these other solutions, so for example, like the Open Doors of the world will buy your house for super cheap if you want to sell it quickly.
Sure.
Well, that's not very attractive. I don't want to give up 20% of my largest asset, probably, just because I'm in a hurry or what have you.
Yeah.
It could work for some people, but not a lot of people. Or there's conventional lending where if you have a mortgage on your old house, you probably won't qualify for a mortgage in addition on your new house.
Usually not.
Which means if you're going to offer on the new house, you've got to make your offer what's called contingent, which is I've got to sell my old house before I can afford to buy the new house, right? That doesn't work for people, and especially in the market now where sellers have a selection and it's multiple offers or whatever. They're like, look, if you're coming in and you need to sell your old house first, unfortunately, you're not going to be competitive to the other offers, right? Because I don't want to have to wait as a seller for you to sell your house first and absorb that risk basically in the transaction. So Arrival solves for all those things basically in a very sort of unique way where we do what's called cross collateralizing. And in simple terms, basically, instead of loaning against one property or the other property, which you may or may not qualify for both loans on, which is a big part of the issue, right? We basically wrap up one loan which takes down both properties, right? So we basically use both properties to secure the loan, which interestingly enough means that you could borrow even over 100% of the purchase price of your new house if you have enough equity in your old house, right? Which is super convenient for like paying our interest only payments or fixing up your old house so that it sells for as much and as quickly as possible, or for moving or life's little sort of cash flow sort of needs that you have between houses. So
Well,
the majority, or I guess
let
not.
me interject here.
Yeah,
The
go
other
ahead.
part that goes beyond the money side of it is the emotional part about having to move
Yep,
twice. And then there's also obviously the cost of moving twice if you're going to store your stuff or live in an apartment or whatever until you close, the other deal. So,
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Or, the lost appreciation for getting outbid on houses a bunch of times,
yeah.
right? On this house, if I'd have, waited another 6 months or so, I would have lost, a substantial amount of money in lost appreciation, basically, because I would, get outbid or what have you, right?
And like you
So for all those reasons,
Yeah, it was just,
yeah,
and like you said, you don't want to be forced to sell your first house. So this gives you time to put a little money into it and get a higher price for your old house. Right.
yep, exactly right. I mean, having been a real estate broker for 25 some odd years or so, right, and running one of the largest real estate brokerage sort of, holding companies in the US, that is a huge issue, right? Even the hottest sellers market that we went through sort of, around the COVID time, shortly after COVID or what have you, homes that weren't nice, weren't improved, were still not selling, even though it was the hottest sellers market ever. And it's because people, your average human, myself included, can't imagine the house looking any different than the way it's presented. So if you sell the house and it looks like it hasn't been renovated in 30 some odd years, or it's got clutter or whatever, any of those things around it, it won't sell. It literally won't sell because people just, gosh, it's not very nice, right?
That's it.
And so, the reality is that you need to sort of clean it out, renovate it a bit, stage it, right, which is decorate it and all that sort of stuff, clean everything out in order for it to sell as quickly and for as much as possible. Otherwise, it will literally not sell. We were the largest real estate brokerage. We had tens of thousands of listings that didn't sell every month
So,
because of
when
primarily that
people
fact.
would like lowball it, they just wouldn't bid at all. Right.
Well, I mean, people could lowball it, but then you're losing a tremendous amount of the potential equity
True.
in your house because it's just not very nice. It's like anytime you want to sell anything, you want to try to make it look as nice as
Yeah,
possible.
and you're not
Otherwise, people, of course, are going to be like, "Yeah, you're desperate. I'm going to give you some, lowball,
also in your
goofy offer."
buyer is someone who's going to occupy it, not a fix and flipper. All right, we're going to go to
That's
our
right.
trivia question here. Which letter is never silent in the English language? I know, yeah, these are kind of weird questions here. The next question is probably a little bit easier. Call 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins that tanning certificate, which again is worth over $100. Which letter is never silent in the English language? And Simon, you only have 26 short chances, right? So stay with us. You're listening to the best of investing. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to the best of investing. One more time, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Simon Chen from Arrival Homes. Second trivia question: which letter is never silent in the English language? What do you think?
I haven't had the time to go through all 26 options or what have you and try to think them all through. So I'm just going to go with, the first one that jumps to mind, which is F for some reason, maybe
No,
because it's part of my favorite
oh yeah,
word.
letter V. Letter.
V.
V.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, no one's,
Yeah, I never would have.
but that's the trivia question. I didn't come up with it. Okay, so now the interesting thing here is, where does Arrival get its money?
Yep. So we are, part of what gives us sort of our ability to be able to scale nationally, right? Which most of our competitions tend to be very small, local, sort of bridge lenders, for example, is our capital efficiency, right? And in order to be capital efficient, you need to be, structured like a typical lender, which is to say that you use borrowed money basically to fund the loans, right? And then once you fund the loans, you sell those loans on within a relatively short timeline to the secondary market, right? So what is unique about Arrival is, number one, we've secured funding capacity specifically for bridge loans, which is extremely difficult, I'm here to tell you, to get, right, for a traditional lender, which is why traditional lenders typically don't want to do bridge loans, right? And as importantly, or if not more importantly, we've built out an entire secondary market basically that buys our loans so that we can turn the capital very, very quickly, right? So the funding comes primarily from a number of different quote unquote warehouse facilities where they give us the money to fund the loans. However, all of them typically have covenants that say that in order for us to have skin in the game, we have to put X amount of money into each purchase, right? And that can range, but averages, let's say somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10% to 15% of the deal, right? And that's where Arrival Fund one comes into play, right? So we have this fund basically where we raise equity capital, which we then use to pay those haircuts, right? So if you do $100 million worth of loans or whatever, and you need 10%, you need $10 million basically to be able to fund all of those loans, even including the warehouse facilities. However, because we turn the loans, and we turn the capital quite quickly, right?
Yeah.
It's not really 10 million that we need. It's substantially less than that, right? Because we turn that capital over and over again.
One other thing that I just thought of, that why traditional lenders aren't in the space, is typically traditional lenders don't charge much in points. And it's not efficient for them to do loans charging very little and then flipping it to the secondary market. They would more like to be portfolio lenders and earn the interest that they're charging the borrower. So
That's right.
like what would your typical situation be with a borrower?
In terms of rates, or in terms of like
The terms
scenario?
to you.
Oh, the terms, yeah. So we're at about 10% interest rate right now, right? Annualized 10% interest rate. Our loan term, by sort of statutory requirement, needs to be under 1 year, so it's 11 months.
Okay.
Loan term. Our average term to payback from consumers is usually 4 to 5 months, right? So they're going to actively fix up and sell their old house for as much and as quickly as possible, and then pay off our loan, or pay off as much of our loan as possible. And then now that they qualify for it, because now they don't only have a mortgage on the new house, they'll get a conventional loan on the new house from a conventional lender, oftentimes a partner that has referred the deal to us in the first place, right? They want that takeout loan sort of at the end.
How many points do you generally charge the borrower?
2.5% origination fee.
Now, if these loans only stay on the books for 4 to 6 months, in the secondary market, they're interested in buying these loans that are going to pay off that fast?
Absolutely. Yeah, because two factors, right? Number one, it's very well secured by, sort of both properties, right? So they know that the money is very secure there. Secondly, it is a higher interest rate than they would typically see, right? So it's in the tens, kind of range, what have you, right?
You guys you don't make a spread for servicing the loan?
We don't service, so we sell it servicing released, right? So we'll make, we make money off of the origination fee, obviously. We make money off of odd days interest before we sell the note to the secondary market, although that's relatively short, like I mentioned, because we're trying to, move it as quickly as possible. And then we make, some premium on sale when we sell the note alone, right? But the motivation for our secondary investors basically is that these are, number one, a substantial, significant volume of these transactions, right? Which is why there's some great synergies between Arrival, the bridge lender, and Arrival Fund One, right? Because Arrival Fund One benefits from a consistent, highly stable, highly, low risk stream of deal flow, right? From Arrival, and similarly, Arrival benefits from, obviously this equity base in order to pay the, sort of the haircuts that we have from our warehouse facilities for funding the loans. So it's a very nice sort of synergistic relationship.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that the risk is so low is that we won't fund a loan if we don't know where we're going to sell it, right? So we already know where it's going when we fund a loan, which, is what mitigates the risk, right? So in 12 years of offering this product, we've never lost, and, this is where the standard disclaimer is, right? Like, past performance is no guarantee of future performance,
course,
kind of thing. But we've never lost a nickel, a penny of principal in 12 plus years of offering this product, right?
No, it's great. As a disclaimer here, I also am an investor in the fund myself, and it pays quarterly. And so far, I've been in for 2 quarters worth, and have enjoyed my distribution. Thank you very much, Simon.
I'm an investor as well, and my wife has been enjoying the distribution.
Same thing. Okay, here's our trivia question here. Which is the world's largest company based on the number of employees they have? Right? That's our trivia question. Call 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins that tanning certificate. Again, which is the world's largest company based on the number of employees? Stay with us. The Best of Investing. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. One more time, Edward Brown here along with Simon Chen from Arrival Funds. Third trivia question, which is the world's largest company based on the number of employees? What do you think?
your listener's going to think I'm an idiot because I don't know any trivia questions. But to be honest, even if it was something that I was passionate about, I'm really bad at trivia. So
Okay, but what do you think? What's the largest company who employs the most people?
I would think it's something manufacturing related, right? Because you have, or no, maybe it's a restaurant or something like that. Uh, oh, but it's employed, so it wouldn't be franchise necessarily.
It's not a
I
fan.
don't know. It's not a franchise. I don't know. Maybe an auto manufacturer or something like that.
Walmart.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
2.1 million employees. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking for, somewhere where they had a large staff of people that are, not franchised. Um, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So that voice you heard is Simon Chen, CEO of Arrival Funds. They've done a pretty good job, I would say, in doing bridge financing, helping people buy their next home without being forced to sell their first home. And I guess that's one of the reasons why you can charge the interest rate that you charge 10% plus a couple of points is mostly for speed.
It's speed, it's convenience. If you actually objectively did the math, right? Like, what are the alternatives to doing this, right? You could sell your house for 20% less. You do the math, that's going to be a heck of a lot more expensive, right? You could, move twice,
Yeah.
right? And sort of deal with that sort of rigmarole. You could, just wait until all the planets align and then, hope that your bid, gets accepted at that moment in time. But, you get outbid on a lot of, opportunities and miss out on a lot of the dollars there. So, even if you did sort of the objective math and saw like what the impact would be, it would be substantially greater, right? What we've actually found is that our consumers don't typically, have issues with the fees, right? Because for them, it's worth sort of the convenience or what have you of being able to do this, and or they literally have no other options, right? We just did a deal for $3 million, right, for the CEO of one of the top, sort of real estate companies in the U.S., right? And I mean, obviously, he has the assets, the wherewithal, or whatever to buy anything he would like, whenever, or what have you. But there's an awful lot of equity. 40% of Americans own their old homes outright, like this guy did, right?
Okay.
So
Right.
$5.5 million house that he was leaving, right, to buy a $3 million house. So sort of, the downsizing sort
Yeah.
of dynamic, right? And the options to, get a HELOC on the old house or, any of those sorts of things, especially for such large, expensive homes or whatever, made it just very, impractical for him to do. And remember too, if the average payoff time is 5 months or so, right, for an Arrival loan, you're not even paying a full year's of interest. You're only paying a fraction of the
Yeah,
year of
just
interest or what
points
have you.
that people, they their eyes get big when they figure out they have to pay. Like if he was charged just 2 points, that's 60 grand
Hmm.
on a 3 million.
Hmm.
Again, like you said,
Yep.
how much of a hassle, how long would it take to get either a HELOC or a conventional loan with, uh,
Yep.
also,
Yep.
I mean, I do get it. I understand. In
Yeah.
fact,
Well,
I don't know if you know this, but about, gosh, a few years ago, I actually wrote an article. I published an article on this exact
uh
situation of, does it make sense to buy your next home and pay and use
yep.
it? And so remind me and
Yep.
send you the article. Uh,
It's literally not an option for an awful lot of folks, right? I mean, what I took the job because I was like, gosh, I just bought a new house and they said we don't accept contingent offers. And I'm like, okay, that's not an issue for me, but what about the other 98% of people out there, right? Like it really annoys me, bothers me that, they wouldn't have that capability basically to win that house, right? Or like let's say my parents wanted to downsize, right? They're retired, they have no documentable income or not a lot anyway or what have you, right? And so like they would not be able to qualify for this, and my mom sure as heck would not want to move and or take a 20% haircut basically on the house that they've been living in for 30 years. So it's, for a lot of people really it's a very practical solution, and it's an alternative to not being able to do it at all,
that's
right, which is obviously
now, do you
tremendously challenging.
lend in all states?
We lend in 12 right now, and are working on going nationwide. This year we'll be in about 21 states by the end of the year, which is, if you do the math, about 81% of the U.S. population, right? So the bigger states, quote unquote. But the goal is, yes, to be going nationwide,
Are you in
in
North
all 50
Carolina
states.
yet?
We're not in North Carolina. We should be in North Carolina this year. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
where my son lives, and so maybe when I go out there to visit him, I can kind of pop in on a few realtors and see if they have
See,
kind of deals.
my head of sales actually is based in Charlotte, so it's near and dear to our hearts for sure.
Ah, I got you. And he lives in Chapel Hill, so it's on the
Oh, sure. Yeah.
different side
Yeah.
of the bay, so to speak.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So, and obviously you're not making any promises, but the fund for investors, what are the
Mhm.
parameters? Suitability. How often do you pay? What do you pay them? What's the minimum, et cetera?
Yeah, so the fund is at a 10% fixed annual interest rate, right? We're paying quarterly. It's for accredited investors only. I do have a fair amount of passion for basically trying to bring higher yielding sort of investments to, individual investors, right? Because it's just, the institutions are typically the ones that are getting that sort of yield on their investments. I remember years ago, there's a friend of mine who posted on Facebook that she was so thrilled that she was getting like, you know, 2.5% interest on something that she bought, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, and then more recently, the CEO of like a prop tech company posted on Facebook he was so happy that he's getting 5% interest on his money,
The bank.
right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
that is, what your average consumer is looking at, right? Or they're getting, less than a percent at their local depository, right? It's appalling the difference between, sort of what the institutions and or very, very well-heeled, investors are making versus,
Inflation.
the vast majority of the
Inflation
US.
and taxes takes that all away. I mean, I was kind of
Yeah,
happy when Poppy Bank had 5% when everyone else was like 3.5 or whatever, and
right.
I didn't keep it in too long. But anyway, all right, audience, stay with us. You're listening to the best of investing. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be back with some closing comments. Welcome back to the best of investing. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Simon Chen, CEO of Arrival Funds. What is the minimum investment?
So 100,000 is our minimum, right? Yeah,
You have to be an accredited investor. Can you give us the
you
definition?
do. Well, I mean, so look at the IRS sort of guidelines for accredited investor, but you have to have a certain sort of either documented income or asset sort of net worth or what have you, either as an individual or as a married individual in order to qualify. I'm always loath to like sort of quote the requirements in case they've changed them
They change.
in the last couple of days or what have you. But look into that. It's it if you're an accredited investor, obviously that separates you from the vast majority of folks out there, what have you, right? So you have to have some wherewithal to sort of understand it. But again, even as an investor myself, obviously I have skin in this game or what have you. But it is a unique situation basically where you have an investment fund that is investing in such a specific sort of type of notes or what have you, and that they have sort of a guaranteed deal stream of those notes,
Yeah.
and there's such safety and stability basically in those notes or the loans
Well, the thing
basically
is,
that we're writing on the other
is
side of
that
the house.
for the fund itself, if you're selling the notes off before the first payment's made, there's
Yep.
like no very very low risk of loss.
There's very, very low risk.
Like the
Yeah.
borrowers, missed a payment. It's already sold off
Yeah.
by then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess your
Yeah.
real risk is to make sure that you can constantly keep the money deployed.
Well, I mean, yeah, the two risks, right? Making sure that we keep the capital deployed first, and then secondly, don't do something as dumb as funding a loan that you don't have a secondary market to buy,
Correct.
right? Because if you need to portfolio that loan, then all of a sudden you lose all of your capital efficiency, and then you're sitting on that. So one of our sort of mandates internally with our operations teams is that we need to make double darn sure that we have a guaranteed buyer basically for the loan when we before we underwrite and fund it,
Do they have
right?
contract with you to, if it fits within a certain box, they have to buy it?
They do. Yeah, you're exactly right. So, so we have a buy box basically. And so, we may deviate from that buy box and ask for exceptions, but we'll always get the exceptions documented, right? So that again, we know that we have a buyer basically for the note before we ever fund the loan.
Well, also,
Otherwise,
I got to think that there's
that puts us at
individual
risk.
investors who if the institution doesn't want it, it's probably some individual investors who'd want it.
There certainly are, and we've done that, by very, very rare exception. But the problem with that is it's not a very scalable model frankly, right? Like we do pretty substantial volume, pretty substantial units every month or what have you. And so needing to go shop around, each investment or what have you would be, cost ineffective. Although we do typically, in those rare instances, make more, by selling it to individual investors than we do to our, sort of institutional investors. But it's not scalable. If, maybe we need to, this is a new business idea, we stand up, some platform which is much, much more liquid, basically, to allow for, TD investors basically to invest in these notes, then, maybe we could scale that. But at this point in time, there's really no marketplace that is fast enough and scalable enough and reliable enough for us to be able to do that without taking on a tremendous amount of risk or carrying costs ourselves.
And how long does an investor need to stay in?
So there's a statutory requirement that they have to be in for a year, right? But then beyond that, they can redeem. And again, because the capital is turned very quickly, several times a month or what have you, the fund itself actually stays quite liquid.
Which is interesting because you got to make sure that it's deployed. I mean, that's kind of a constant balancing act for you, I have to think. Okay, Simon Chen, how do people get a hold of? Would they call you? Who would they get in touch with?
Sure. So I guess the easiest way to reach us, I'm typically pulled in a lot of directions, just got off a plane myself or whatever. So just do info at arrivalhomeloans.com. And there's always somebody sort of manning that switch, right? Which is good.
Very good. All right. Here's our thoughts for the day. And again, Simon, thank you for joining us. 85% of Americans cannot do simple math. Thank goodness I'm in the other 25%. And I accidentally swallowed some Scrabble tiles, and now I'm experiencing constant vowel movements. The next trip to the bathroom could spell disaster. All right, audience, tune in next week to The Best of Investing. We're going to be giving away more free prizes for answering trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm Edward Brown, wishing you the best of investing. So long.